Hello everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to my Pokemon Sun and Moon 3DS review. Now before we get started, just want to state a few things. For one, I specifically played Pokemon Moon. I have not played Pokemon Sun, though I am aware of the few key differences, such as which Pokemon are exclusive to each game. On top of that, it took me a total of about 26 hours in order to clear through the main story of the game. There is still plenty more for me to do after that 26 hours, especially as someone who doesn't have a whole lot of Pokemon waiting for me out of the 802 total that now exists. And finally, before we get started, don't take this review all that seriously. It's just going to be me talking about the game over some gameplay, and hopefully Nintendo doesn't take it down. So for those of you who don't have the patience for the full review, TLDR, this was a great return to Pokemon for me after 17 years. It was engaging, cheesy at times, solid RPG gameplay, moderate challenge. Minor frustrations with some new mechanics, but we'll get into that in the review itself. So as I just stated right there in the TLDR, this is my first Pokemon game since Silver and Gold on the Game Boy back in 1999. So for me, I've missed a heck of a lot of stuff that's happened in the Pokemon universe. Yes, I've played a few of the off games, the ones with the Shadow Pokemon, but I don't know anything about some of the new types and some of the new advantages and disadvantages that come with raising Pokemon in the newer games. So first off, something I'm not used to from my days back in Pokemon is Pokemon having a really deep story in the games itself. Pokemon Moon immediately tried to pull me in with a full-fledged story, placing my character as an 11-year-old newcomer to the islands of Alola, a chain of islands with a ton of unique Pokemon and traditions. While the beginning of the game felt a little bit too focused on the narrative, and took a whole half an hour before I even got my starter Pokemon, it kept me engaged in a way I don't usually associate with Pokemon, but that I associate with other RPGs. I do wish the opening wasn't as long, but it was tolerable, especially because the gameplay itself felt like a blast back to 1999 when I last played my Pokemon Silver. All the classic mechanics are still here, and I commend Game Freak for sticking with a formula that has worked so well while looking for means to innovate. One of the new ways that they try to innovate in Pokemon Sun and Moon is something called Z moves, which are gradually introduced to you throughout the game as super attacks. Basically, you're given a stone with a certain type attached to it. When you give it to a Pokemon that has those type of attacks, it enhances them and makes them incredibly powerful. I admit, it was interesting at first. I used them to turn the tides of battle, bring down a threatening Pokemon in one fell swoop, even if I didn't need to, just because I could. But I could only use them once per battle, and honestly, after going through about half of the game, as I made consistent use of them, I was glad that I didn't need them all that much to get through the game, because the animations are so long, and it grows tiresome pretty fast, with no way of shortening them. Overall, it was cool getting to see them for the first time as I went through the game. So something else that blew my mind as someone who hasn't played since Generation 2 was that Technique Machines, also known as TMs, the items that teach Pokemon new abilities, are permanent now. Apparently, this was in the previous generation also, but something that I've seen new people get excited about is that Hidden Machines, HMs, have also been removed, replacing their previous effects with a series of mounts that can be used to do things like break or push rocks, surf, or fly. It's definitely better than keeping that HM slave Pokemon in your party that knows strength all the time, just in case you get to the next part of the game and you gotta push a rock. Way better than that. Now, I will admit, the game did feel a bit overwhelming at some points, with these new mechanics we just mentioned before, as well as the tons of new Pokemon that were available both in Alola plus Generations 3 through 6 since I didn't play those. It was just a lot of information to try to take in, but what was good for me as a seasoned RPG player was that none of this was harmful to my experience with the game. It actually felt really good not knowing what a lot of the Pokemon did, because I was able to experience them for the first time, maybe get smashed by them, but develop a strategy for the next time I encountered them, or develop a strategy on the fly. It's something, again, I don't usually associate with Pokemon because I'm so familiar with the first two generations that never happened to me back then. But running into some of these crazy new types and combinations that they have felt very, very good, and I'm glad that they were able to give me this kind of experience as someone who has not played the game consistently. Now, progressing through the game itself was also familiar, though gyms and badges are replaced with something known as Island Trials. Basically, you go through minigame-esque trials that end in a battle against what's known as a totem Pokemon, usually some sort of beefed up Pokemon with additional stats. It made for some surprisingly challenging battles, none of which were able to eliminate me, but they were welcome challenges for me to overcome. After clearing some mini trials, you come to a grand trial against the kahuna of each island, which is basically the equivalent of what a gym leader would be. Upon defeating them, you complete the island's grand trial, allowing you to progress to the next island. The trials were a welcome change to the gym formula I grew up with, though some of them were so easy I kinda wondered why they bothered. I know that the game is not catered towards hardcore players. It's catered towards children who are able to understand these things, but I can't help but wonder if there was much thought that went into these at all. Now, as you can tell, even with some of the downsides I've had so far, my experience I mostly enjoyed with Pokemon Moon. I did have a few minor grievances that I do want to bring up now though. For one, enemies being able to call help in battle now basically was one of the worst things I'd experienced. Basically what can happen is they can call in other nearby Pokemon to double team against you. In totem battles, when they use this mechanic, it made sense and it was interesting. Even for hunting things like perfect competitive level type Pokemon with good IVs or shinies, it's useful, I acknowledge that. But I'm your average player just trying to catch a damn Igglybuff, and it keeps calling for its friends and I gotta keep fainting or killing its friends before I can catch it. It was really frustrating. To be honest, all that frustration probably would have been alleviated if they didn't restrict your ability to capture Pokemon when they call for help. Basically, if a Pokemon calls for help, you can't try to catch it unless there's only one Pokemon on the field at a time. That was the most frustrating part of the entire game to me, to be honest. This is compounded by another problem I have with the game, which was the encounter rate. Now, they give you tons of repels, so if you are having trouble with the encounter rate, they give you plenty of ways to deal with it, and I acknowledge that. But you know what? Even thinking back to Pokemon like Red and Blue, I don't remember Silver and Gold as well as I remember Red and Blue. I remember those having pretty high encounter rates, actually, but sometimes it just felt like this game took it way too far. I'll take 2 steps in a grass patch that's like 5 feet long, and I'll encounter 3 Pokemon. It was ridiculous at times. And finally, my last major grievance with the game was the villain. Now, I grew up with Team Rocket, who were pretty silly, at least in their own regard in the anime. But this game's villains were downright hard to put up with for me. They made me smile occasionally, but that smile was always accompanied with a facepalm. And there was never a point, even in some of the game's most climactic moments, where I felt like I could take them seriously enough to even enjoy the moment. That being said, the ultimate villain of the game, which I won't spoil, was pretty entertaining. Overall, I'm glad I cut off my Pokemon hiatus in order to take on Sun and Moon. It was a solid experience that makes me want to continue progressing in the Pokemon series and makes me wish I hadn't missed so many generations of Pokemon up to this point. I'm looking forward to streaming more Pokemon Moon, and hopefully when I go into the game's post-game content, I'll still feel the way I feel now, although maybe a little bit more burnt out as I'm waiting for Final Fantasy 15. But anyway, let me know what you guys thought of the game itself if you're enjoying it. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned for more videos on my channel. Anyway, thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.